Welcome everybody to the live stream. Thank you so much for joining our homesteading virtual series. We are here with Alexia Allen of Hawthorn Farm here in Woodinville, Washington. And Alexia and her amazing community, along with her husband Daniel, have been just incredibly resilient and brilliant farmers. They steward the land really well to the point where they're able to feed themselves from their property, and they have been for the last like 10 years
ish. Yeah.
That's so incredible, and I just hope that we can all start to adapt those into our lives and our local food systems. So really grateful you're here. If you have a garden, if you have a large property, this is going to be applicable to you today. And I'm coming to you live from 21 Acres. 21 Acres is a center for sustainable living in Woodinville, Washington. We help to educate our community around topics such as agroecology and all that comes with it, the social perspective of farming, along with the regenerative practices of farming. We also are an education center around climate technology and infrastructure technology. I showed some folks earlier, but I'm in this gorgeous building that was intentionally designed to maximize its relationship with Earth's natural systems. Anyway, that's a little bit about 21 Acres. And before we get fully started into the program today, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement to where we're situated. So both Alexia's homestead, Hawthorn Farm, and 21 Acres are in Woodinville, Washington. And we are on the ancestral lands of Indigenous nations, including the Stillaguamish, the Duwamish, and Coast Salish people. And we'd like to honor them currently as they continue to protect biodiversity all across the world, or all across the ecosystems that we still are fortunate enough to have. And Indigenous people in general that steward 85% of the world's biodiversity while representing only 5% of the population. So just keep that in mind as we go through this program, and just want to give honor and thanks to this land that we're grateful to steward for future generations. Thank you for letting me share that piece. But for now, I'm gonna pass it up to you, and so excited to learn with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rianne, and thanks everybody on the call. And feel free to chime in if the wind gets too much or if there's anything that I need to change on my end. For sure, I'm more comfortable with a digging fork than a computer most days. And it's also a treat to be here with you all. And I welcome your questions. I'll pause for questions throughout. Everything I say is just my 2 cents. It is one opinion among many. And actually, what I like to encourage is for people to become their own experts in their own place. There's nobody who has the opportunity to know and love your land as well as you do when you're there every day. The daily practice of connecting with a landscape, whether you're eating from it or not, I find very nourishing and very important to keep up. I haven't found a place on earth that's like, no, I don't want humans to care about me at all. Pretty much every place is like, yeah, pay attention. There's beauty, there's magic, there's mystery here, and there's even food. So that's the spirit with which I approach this, and I'm excited to jump in with you all. So I am going to do that by sharing my screen, which it tells me I can't do. But can you magically wave a wand?
I sure can. Here we go.
Okay.
There we go. Does that allow you to now?
Oh. Yes.
Yes. Sorry about that.
All right. No, that's great. This is new to me. Let's see. Bing. Okay. And play. Oh, this is so fun. Okay. So I have had a slow process of figuring out what my future self is going to be happy I did now. So wherever you're gardening, or if you're just starting gardening, this is just an applicable skill of what can I do now that my future self is going to be happy about? And how can I just try and have as much fun doing the things now that will also help my future self be really happy? And whether this is the future Alexia next week, next month, next year, in 10 years, whether this is the generations who are going to come after me, that guides my actions. Am I doing now what people in the future are going to be happy to do? And I once visited a man who was in his 80s. He lived nearby here. He'd been a nut farmer his whole life, like walnuts, chestnuts, hazelnuts. And I walked around his property with him, and he showed me this big row of timber walnuts he had planted. He's like, I'm 83. I'm never going to see the benefit of these trees, but somebody's going to be glad I planted them. I'm like, wow, that's the spirit. So garden for your future self. Okay, well, what will you be glad you did? And I've divided this talk into kind of two larger sections. One of them is reviewing what happened. What the heck just happened? Summer is a busy time. There's often a lot of go, 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 and the next thing, or kind of like an outward expansion of the energy. And then as the days get shorter, okay, what happened? What are we learning? What are we harvesting? How does it taste? What do we want to do differently next year? And then the other part of that, what comes out of that, is setting the stage for future success. Hey, wow, this worked, this didn't. This will help shift us towards more of what works and less of what doesn't work, knowing that the future is always uncertain and we can't control things about the weather and stuff, but we can build the diversity and resilience into our food systems. So that's what it's about here. That future success, there are a couple of things to look at there. One is soil care. I mean, without caring for the soil, we just have nothing to stand on. And then making compost, a little note on that, since I'm a compost fan. And also a nod to planting perennials and shifting towards growing more perennials if that's of interest to you. So that's a little bit of the outline, and that's the hoop house here at Hawthorn Farm. So it's never a bad time to observe what's actually happening. This is part of that harvesting the lessons of the previous growing season part. Whether or not you actually grew a garden last season, there's still a lot to learn that can help you for a future garden. I came to gardening and homesteading from a nature awareness, natural history, wilderness survival perspective. That was my training. I was trained as a field biologist, and those skills apply beautifully to growing food. What do you know? Food is part of natural systems like the sun and the rain and the water and the birds. All this impacts the domesticated animals as well. And here at the farm, we try to have a good relationship between the wild places and the more domesticated places on the farm. And of course, that's not a clear-cut boundary, but just observing what's happening. When the birds hatch out their chicks in the spring, that's a great time for us to hatch out our chicks. When there are a whole bunch of seedlings coming up in the world, like in the spring or in the fall after a fall rain, that's an easy time to start seeds for the garden. When everything is rotting, that's a great time to start a compost pile. So tying into those natural systems, there's no bad place to start with that. And I'm putting out there a challenge for you all to draw maps. I don't like drawing maps. It's really good for my brain. The point is not to make beautiful, incredible maps that you have to show anybody. The point is what it does for your brain. And I put one of mine there just so you don't think that it has to be really involved or detailed. Those nice crisp lines on that map, that's because I traced it off of a survey of my land. It's not because I'm out there measuring everything really crisply. It's like, this is about the garden space I have, or oh, where are the trees? Where is the biggest tree here in my garden? Where are those shadows on a sunny day? Can I go out and just measure, just take note of where the shadows fall? And just try doing that one time a week for a month, one time a month for a year, any schedule that works for you to just get a sense of, what is the physical territory I'm working with. And like I said, I don't love doing it, and it does great things for my brain. And I'm willing to bet it would do great things for yours. Don't worry about it being perfectly accurate. If that's a barrier to you, just what's happening here. And another important thing to harvest is, what was your limiting factor? So think about that for yourself right now. Like, was my limiting factor knowledge about how to garden? Did I feel hindered by not knowing enough? Was it sheer access? Like, there's no community garden where I live. I live in an apartment. I have a hard time actually getting to soil. Was it too much sun, too little sun? Water, is that a limiting factor? I hate watering a garden, so I didn't have as much success as I could have. Time. This is a huge thing, not just for the growing the food. Like, the plants can grow with, like, while you sleep, the plants are growing. But then the harvesting and the processing and the shelling and the storing and the, like, bringing them in before frost happens, that is no joke on time. And that can be a limiting factor. If, like, a big work project came up right when all the raspberries were ripe, or, like, gosh, my mom was sick and I had to take care of her right when this harvest window was for the potatoes, and I just didn't get them dug. So just factoring those things in for yourself. What was your limiting factor? If you address what limited you the most, then that has the biggest impact on your future success. For me, the heat this year, I was like, these potatoes are just going to have to go without water today, because it is not worth me getting heat exhaustion to go out there and water the potatoes. Like, yep, that's what I decided. This making sense for folks? I can't, like, see nods, but maybe if you like I'm nodding or something in the chat, and I hope some kernels of this are useful.
This is absolutely useful. I just love how applicable this can be to all gardeners, regardless of location. And thank you. It looks like we got someone saying, yes, this is so helpful. Yeah, many folks are joining from all over different parts of the globe, very different ecosystems, but I love how universal these themes are of observation and really, thinking about things that might be limiting or even successful too. But
Yeah.
Oh yeah, all of these were kind of limiting factors for me personally.
You gotta choose one to work on. When you can assess what they are, then it's easier to address them. And one of the permaculture principles is watch a place for a whole year before you jump in and do stuff. So, there's no bad place. I just make it a daily habit, like take a cup of coffee outside and we just watch what's actually happening. How windy is it? Like, your plants care about all this. So if you've been gardening and maybe you took some notes, you can go back and track what happened. I just have to take notes. I don't take very good notes, but whatever I do take is pretty darn useful to me. Typically, it's worth it. So there's a page here that's an example of my husband, Daniel. He noted what he wanted. And this was just him flipping through the seed catalog. You notice it's all in, alphabetical order. And he just flipped through. He said, this is what I want to eat. Here's how much I want. And would I be willing to grow it myself personally, or would I like somebody else to grow it? Well, great information. So I can come back and I can make a note and I can say, did we have one bulb of garlic per day for as much as we wanted? Or, oh my gosh, we were so sick of parsnips. Okay, I planted like 200 row feet of parsnips, and that was too many parsnips. Good problem to have, but it was more than we needed. Plant less next year. So that's a way to kind of adjust those targets about what do we have? What did we want? What can we plan for next year? I just put up some free garden observation journals at hawthornfarm.org that have seasonal bundles of 20 pages where you can just print them out, take one out to the garden, and just fill in the questions that are slightly different each week. And, that's going to give you a lot of information if that helps you make a habit of it. Okay, So that's a little bit about harvesting the lessons of what happened, what's happening right now, and then what's in the future. Oh yeah, and this is an example of me observing the garden and basing some management decisions based on that. So that's me in the popcorn patch. And I noticed that every time I walk past the popcorn patch, it's right over there. You probably can't really see it. So there's my popcorn patch in the background over by that blue barrel. Every time I walk past, a cloud of little birds comes out. All the juncos and chickadees and sparrows are hanging out in that corn. And they are busily depositing phosphorus in there in the form of bird droppings. And my land needs phosphorus. I'm a little low on that. So the birds are happily bringing me free phosphorus, like high quality stuff, just because I leave the corn stalks up. And I leave the corn stalks up through most of the winter. Some tidy part of me might say, oh, I've got to take those out of there. But then I say, wait, I'm getting paid to leave them up, and it's less work for me. So awesome. I'm going to let the birds work for me over there, and it's going to be easier. So that's just one thing that's applicable from me noticing what's happening in the garden. Okay, on to the future of your garden over the winter.
We did also before, there's one question that just came up. After cutting, I assume after harvesting the corn, you leave them in place, just to clarify.
Yeah, I snap the ears off of the corn, and then I just leave the stalks standing. I have chopped a few stalks to go feed the goats on days I'm like, oh, those goats need food, quick, grab a corn stalk. But otherwise I just leave them up there, and they rot pretty well through until the spring. And then if I just cultivate them or rake them out with the horse-drawn cultivator or just by hand, it's quite manageable to take them out then. And the birds love them all winter.
That's so helpful. Thank you. That's brilliant.
Yeah. And I'll even sometimes just mash them down in the rows that they're in, and then I can plant other crops in there. Like I might this year just in the spring, I can mash them down, and then I'll have big windrows of corn, and I'll either put compost in between that. So I have like rows of corn stalks and rows of compost. And then I plant my next crop right there in that compost, and I step on the corn stalks as my path. So lots of options, and watching your garden will tell you what's best for you. Yeah. So minimizing bare soil, another great reason to leave variety of debris in the garden, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, where we just have rain coming down for so much of the winter. Every little raindrop is whizzing towards the earth, actually faster than is accounted for by gravity. Pretty cool. I don't know if I don't know what's happening, but water is mysterious. I think we know that much. And bare soil gets compacted by rain. This is observable fact. So putting something on the surface of the soil, whether it's living plants, whether it's a mulch of some kind, or just a crop that you're growing, that's a good way to help mitigate nutrient loss from all that rain coming down. And even if you don't have a lot of rain, bare soil just tends to get compacted and just isn't as happy as soil that's really alive and has a thriving food web in it. So mulching and cover crops are the two best known strategies, one easier than the other. And then we also grow a lot of overwintered crops. There's my sister Clara in the garlic patch. We plant the garlic in the fall, harvest it the following summer. So that's what it looks like in the spring. They're living roots through a lot of that soil, and there's wood chips around the garlic, and is pretty happy garlic patch. And that just grows all winter for us, which is pretty cool. Okay, so mulch. You're going to get my opinions about mulch. I am a little more skeptical of it and some of the grand claims you hear. I hear a lot of people like, mulch is the answer. I'm like, it is an answer when you do it properly. Like, good mulch in a system that works is amazing. You can also set yourself up for problems. So if you're starting up on mulching, I just want to steer you towards the success end of that. Leaves are great. I have one gardening client who's like, I am getting all the leaves from all my neighbors who, leave them out in bags. And I say, hey, can I take your bags of leaves? And it's a great time to scavenge leaves. I rake them up on the road by our house, rake them up from the lawns, and fallen leaves are typically great mulch. However, not walnut. Walnut, horse chestnut as well have chemicals in them that inhibit the growth of other plants. So you probably don't want that in your garden and around your plants. It doesn't last forever and ever, but it's long enough that it will definitely cramp the style of your garden. So just be careful which leaves you're pulling up, and also what might be contaminating them. If somebody's like, oh, here are these leaves I raked out of my dog yard, like, just don't put them on your lettuce. Don't put them on your winter garden bed. Just be aware of what could be in there. Some people buy straw or hay. I have imported scary, crazy numbers of weed seeds that way. Shiny little black, beautiful seeds in the hay that I got for my horses. And next thing I know, my garden is chock-a-block full of wild amaranth. That's pretty ferocious plant to deal with. So something else to be aware of, hay will tend to have more nutrients in it because it's cut before the plant goes to seed. Straw is the stuff you get after the plant, like a wheat or oat or barley, has gone to seed. So it doesn't have as much nutrition in it for the soil, but it's better than nothing. You've probably driven past a construction project or a roadside, road work where they've been spreading straw for mulch to help control erosion. I tend to find people who are getting rid of straw bales after they've needed them for a Halloween party. Sometimes you can scoop up good straw that way. However, beware of pyridines. There's a class of herbicides, broadleaf herbicides. There are several different brands that can be used on hay or straw to get broadleaves like plantain or clover out of the field. And they are very persistent, like multiple years, 3 years, maybe more, in a compost pile, even after an animal has eaten them. So I have a hard time trying to find hay for my horses that has not been treated with these chemicals, because if the horses eat that hay and then I'm using the manure for compost, that compost can still make plants sick. So if you've been saying, wow, why did my tomatoes do so terrible this year? Why are these raspberries suddenly shriveling up? It might be because of chemicals that have passed through from whatever mulch you found. If you buy hay and it's got a bunch of clover and it's got a bunch of stuff in it, they probably didn't use pyridines on that field. But just a heads up, not all mulch is created equal. Do you think these chemicals have been around about 20 years in terms of in use? So just be aware of that. Or if you're getting manure from someplace, it's probably going to be fine, but just want you to have a heads up. Also, adding the same kind of mulch or adding just more and more organic matter every year can build up nutrient imbalances in your soil. I've been putting manure on my front garden here and realized a decline in performance, decline in flavor, and testing the soil showed that it has way too much potassium in it from all that importation. The soil all around the outside of the garden is fine, but right inside, it has too much potassium for me putting more and more poop on it every year. So again, just something to think about. More is not always better. Also around here, mulch makes the soil stay super cool in the spring, cool and moist. Sometimes mulch advocates are like, the soil stays cool and moist under the mulch. I'm like, great, I actually need warm and dry, especially in May, when I'm trying to get squash to germinate. So you can still use mulch, I'll even just put a little hump of soil that pokes up out of the mulch, and I plant my squash seeds in that. So, there are ways to mitigate it, but it's not just like, oh, mulch, and then there's nothing else required. Slugs, sow bugs, earwigs, voles, rats are also thrilled with most mulches, and just something else to consider, especially here in the Northwest. Slugs are ferocious. We mitigate that by keeping ducks. So our ducks go around and eat up all the slugs, but still the slugs can be like total game changers for folks. Tarps or greenhouse plastic are also fantastic. I use those a fair amount for a lot of things. Greenhouse plastic, I buy the best quality I can. If I'm using petroleum products in the garden, I want them to last and be sturdy. A lot of the cheaper clear plastics, especially, just like crumble after a year. And then I have all this stuff crumbling up in my garden. So once our greenhouse plastic has done a few years of hard duty on our greenhouses, then we use it to cover soil. And it takes multiple months to kill winter plants. Might just take like a week in the hot sunny days in the summer, but it's a way to prevent nutrient loss, to prevent rainwater from just washing your nutrients away. And it may or may not kill what's underneath. It may or may not kill the plants underneath. If you mow what's underneath there really close and you leave the plastic on for a while, there's the potential, especially if you use an opaque plastic, to in the spring just peel back the plastic and plant right into nice soft soil. So that's kind of the dream, especially if you mow really close and then you put some leaves or mulch over it and then you put greenhouse plastic on top of that. That would probably be my favorite way to start a new garden. Be like, I've got this lawn. What do? Mow the lawn really close, put down some horse manure, put down some leaves, put down some greenhouse plastic, leave that all winter, see what happens. Some people use cardboard. Some people are big fans of cardboard. Some people say it's full of glues and fillers and who knows what. I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but I can tell you that I don't use much because I created underground empires for the rats by using extensive cardboard. Yeah, like truly incredible, like ant farm level rat palaces.
That's exactly what happened to me when I was trying to control some of my blackberry and on the slope in my yard. And yeah, I just saw like a bunch of rats and I was like, oh, there's nibbles in my food. But then I was like, okay, so thank you so much for shouting out how cardboard can become kind of a problem. But if you're trapping up, the air, with the tarp, it seems to be really effective. Like they can't survive under there. Plants can't survive under there. But the cardboard could be food for rats and also for weeds.
Yeah, so just use with caution. A lot of this is your mileage may vary, and what's in that cardboard? Does it have a shiny plasticky layer on it that's going to inhibit stuff? It's hard to get all the little bits of tape and the little stringy tape off of there. I don't know. Yeah. I'm not a huge fan. Some people totally love it. Might depend on, the size of garden that you are covering up. For sure, it is probably better to, around here at least, to cover a bed with cardboard than to leave it bare.
Yes.
It's just like, we're just kind of figuring out, the least of the evils in terms of how we take care of our soil.
That's true. Not all cardboard is bad. It's really, it is an incredible, protective tool that can break back down if it's helpful, as you said, probably avoiding the ones with paint or ink, and all again to protect the soil. And I did have a couple questions if now might be a good time for one or two about cover crop. Someone asked, what kind of cover crop do you like to use? Anything in particular?
Yes, we'll get there. That is the slide right after this one. I said I didn't, use a ton of organic mulches, but I also have abundant horse manure to deal with. So that goes on the garden and it's going to be okay. You know, these piles are going to hang out through the winter. They're going to get absolutely bristling with earthworms. And then we can spread them out, or we can just plant a squash right into each of those piles in the spring. So we'll do our best to keep those little piles of manure covered. Maybe that's where the cardboard comes in. But then we can plant into them in the spring or spread them out. So, you know, kind of use what you've got. This is people grow food all around the world pretty regularly in all sorts of conditions. You have resources around you somehow to grow something and have fun doing it. Yes. So there you go. I happen to have abundant horse manure. So there we go.
Yes, I love that. One of the previous classes we were talking about how you strategize, like having trees on your farm and using their shade to grow some of those leafy greens that can't tolerate the incredible heat. And, you know, just strategizing around the garden comes with observation. Oh gosh, and this is the other question that came up was soil. Soil testing. I shared a resource in the chat for folks. If you're local to King County, we do have a awesome King Conservation District who focuses on healthy soils, biodiversity, and gardeners to be as sustainable as possible. So they have a free soil testing program. You can do 5 tests a year that are free. Anything additional is $20. There's a link in the chat to that. But I wanted to know is there a schedule you would recommend to test your soil? I've never really known when to seize the opportunity.
Okay, it's one of those things where there's no bad time. Just try to do it at the same time every year, which helps you compare apples to apples. And folks, put in the chat if you have or have not tested the soil. I'm pretty curious if folks are like, oh yeah, I do soil tests every year, or like, no, that seems way too daunting. Just have you or have you not tested, sent a soil sample off to a lab? I like doing it. I try to do it just about every year, and usually in the fall, because I've just spent all growing season noticing what grows best where, and what parts of the soil I was curious about in my gardens. I mean, I have like 12 different gardens with different kinds of soil around my house, and at $25 a pop, I don't send all of them into the lab every single year, but I can kind of figure out which ones I'm curious about. So I do it around this time of year, October, fall for me. And I use Logan Labs. All the labs, you can probably get good information from all of them, but they often use different processes to get their results. So you might send like the exact same sample of soil, 2 scoops from the same bucket of soil to different labs, and they would come back with potentially differing results. It's like, what are these people testing? Like, what's reality here? And so I use Logan Labs because a lot of the spreadsheets and stuff I work with are set up for the numbers from a Logan Labs result. And you can go kind of as deep as you want into the mysteries of soil. I really don't know very, very much, but I have seen big changes, huge changes in the nutrient and the deliciousness of my food from at least paying a little attention to a soil test. Basically saying, do I have enough calcium and magnesium? Do I have some of these micronutrients? Like, whoa, are all these plants all stunted and weird because I don't have enough zinc in the soil? That's really easy to fix. Like, that's easy to fix with 1 tablespoon of zinc sulfate sprayed onto the leaves, just like you would take a zinc tablet if you feel a cold coming on. Give it to the plants. So fall is a good time for me. It's a good time for me to add some of those amendments like lime, which is a calcium amendment, because it takes that calcium a little while to work into the soil. And that's been one of the big things for me. In this area, we tend to have low calcium soils. I've never found a soil that had too much calcium. But one of the things that people hear when they say, oh, my soil needs lime, they'll run down to the store, and there are several different kinds of lime. Ag lime, or agricultural lime, doesn't have magnesium in it. And dolomite lime often has magnesium. And if your soil has enough magnesium already, and you add more magnesium to it, you are going to make your soils even tighter and more airless if you just like load them up with magnesium. So you need to know which kind of lime you need. Does your soil need magnesium or not? And that's a little hard to tell by just looking, you know? So you can just get some numbers from a lab, and I've found it really worth it for any place where I'm really growing and eating food. My body is made out of the soil I eat from. In fact, everybody's body is made out of the soil that we eat from. So it's worth taking a little time to invest in this. Lime is cheap. I go buy it at the feed store around here when, gosh, and like a 40-pound bag is maybe $8. And probably for your average small sort of garden, it's, you know, that will last you a couple of years. I sprinkle it on like powdered sugar on a chocolate cake. People are like, what do I do with this bag of white powder? I'm like, powdered sugar on a chocolate cake. Come on, have fun, you know?
And is there a proper time that you would want to apply lime? We have a couple of questions about kind of at-home uses and at-home application for soil testing. But one that just came up for me is lime also something you want to do at the end of the year or the beginning of the growing season, or intermittent?
There's no bad time for lime necessarily. I like doing it in the fall because it kind of mellows into the soil and rain doesn't wash it away too readily. Some stuff like nitrogen fertilizers or, you know, high grade compost or even manure, I don't really want to put that on my land in the fall because the rain's going to wash all the goodies away. Calcium tends to stick around a little more. So so it's a good time for lime in particular, and some other amendments as well. And the at-home tests, sometimes, you know, like the hardware store in town sells one of the little like orange capsules that you put into water, little green capsules to test the pH and stuff. Those are sometimes helpful. They're not quite as detailed a snapshot as a test from Logan Labs that can tell you, you know, the parts per million of boron in your soil and stuff, or how many pounds per acre you need to add of X, Y, or Z. So it's fun science project for sure, like, and kind of nice to corroborate other things. But I just stick with the Logan Labs. I just send off the samples, and they have a protocol on their website for how to gather a soil sample. You know, how deep to dig and how many places to dig. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That I also linked that in the chat. First time I'm hearing about them, and they look amazing. So really appreciate that.
Yeah, and they're great. And you want to, the test is helpful because then you know what you're doing, and you're not going to add too much of something because you can't take it out. What are you going to do? Pick all the magnesium molecules out of your soil? Like, there are cool ways and like tips to mitigate it. Kind of like if you make the soup too spicy, you can, like, if you add a few more potatoes, it's going to help balance that out. But, you know, like I mentioned with the ag lime and the dolomite lime, like those have different effects on your soil. You might as well know which one's going to be the best one for you.
That might help for folks who want to understand the results, is a little more science, and hopefully some of the, if you go send your soil out, it sounds like they have kind of recommendations slightly for what you should do to offset, or you can search them.
Yeah, and I use a service called Organicalc. Organicalc, I haven't written that down here, but that'd be a great thing if somebody like gets their page of numbers back from Logan Labs and is like, what do I do? Organicalc is designed for gardeners to grow nutrient-dense foods using information from Logan Labs. You take your Logan Labs results, you just type them in to Organicalc, and I forget how much it costs, like per test. But then you just say, here's how much square footage I'm gardening, and here's how much nitrogen I want in my soil. You know, you can kind of just make your some of your best guess there, and they'll say, this is how many pounds of feather meal you need to add. This is how many pounds of zinc sulfate you might want to add throughout the season. You know,
that is amazing. Okay, I added that to the chat as well.
Great.
Thank you so much for all these.
Good. Okay, good on nutrients so far. On to cover crops. Oh wait. Oh, Did that go? Okay. What the heck did I do with cover crops? All right, I'm sure they're coming up here any minute. So this kind of falls into the mulching category of what do I do with organic material? There's no bad place for it. Like everything should rot. Everything that can possibly rot, we want to give it a chance to rot. But I kind of high grade my organic matter that comes in, like prime maple leaves. Those are going to go, you can see in the picture, on my fall garlic. So, you know, that's mulching the garlic beautifully. That garlic is thrilled to be growing there. If there's something like I'm walking down the street and some neighbor I don't really know well says, hey, you want these grass clippings? Like, you're a farmer, take these grass clippings. And I'm like, grass clippings from the edge of the road with a styrofoam cup ground up into them. Thanks. I'll take them down and I put them in the flower bed that's already down there by the road, you know. And I also have places where I put, you know, put organic matter or brushy stuff. And I'm like, well, I might want to plant another tree here someday, or we might want to plant more raspberries over here. I'll just tuck that stuff in a pile over at the edge, and it's going to be great beetle habitat. And, you know, it's not something that I would want to put right where I want to grow lettuce in 2 months, but I can tuck it off to the edge and it's going to be building fertility somewhere. Like, there's no reason not to have it just building fertility. And when I moved here in 2003 and I started trying to figure out where to do a garden, and I was clearing land and some of the weedy edges around the yard here, I found a place where the previous owners had piled up their Christmas tree skeletons, and all the soil around that was just hard and weedy and compacted. But underneath the Christmas tree pile, I could just stick my hand in up to the elbow in soft, black, crumbly earth. Not necessarily that the Christmas trees were so full of nutrients, but that they created a habitat for the soil life to live. So sometimes those, you know, kind of distant, or like, oh, just pile the brush up over there, those wind up being some awesomely fertile spots after a few years. But hey, it's not like you had to do any work in the meantime. And if they're sunny enough, I'll do something like plant a big rambling squash next to them, or throw a tomato plant nearby and kind of let a big plant take over that pile and make use of it too. I also use a fermentation barrel, which is pretty much what it sounds like. That blue barrel you saw by the corn patch, just rainwater and weeds. And that was great. It's stinky. It is not something if you have a squeamish neighbor, but during the summer, it gets aromatic and it's delicious for the plants. It's like slimy, and there are these amazing rat-tailed maggots living in it, and the plants just grow like crazy when I water them with some of the stuff for the fermentation barrel, especially any weeds that have gone to seed. And I don't want to just put those seeds right into my compost pile. I'll ferment them, and it's pretty awesome. And I saw there is a question about the results from different labs. It has to do with the lab process, like which acids they use to extract different minerals from the sample and stuff. And I mean, soil science, it's maybe a little more of soil art. Like, soil is extremely variable, and they say in the soil sampling directions, like, don't gather soil from around gates, because where the soil is compacted, it's going to give you a different result. You know, did somebody spill lime here? Or when we keep chickens in the garden and their oyster shell spills, if I scoop up soil from underneath that, it's going to read higher in calcium than the rest of the garden, you know, just in that small area. So you want to take lots of soil samples in general, and soil is still pretty darn variable. Hope that helps.
Thank you. And one thing I just want to shout out is one of the greatest things I got to witness when walking on your farm in May was the permaculture aspect of, planting where things are probably going to have their best shot, whereas, modern crops, like modern industrial agriculture, it focuses on monocrop culture where they're like, only corn goes here. And then, all the problems that's a whole like other 5-hour conversation we could have about how to better improve industrial ag. But I love what you said about, okay, well, I'm just going to throw a tomato plant right under here, see if it can grow, and definitely want to encourage that if you have the space to do that, and or just checking out the garden beds that you may have access to, and seeing what they like to do.
Cool. Well, let's see what's next here. Okay, finally we get to cover crops. So mulch is kind of a find the right substance, put it in the right place. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. And cover crops are like, do I do this at this time? And does it line up with this other thing that I need to do at this place? And does it line up with the other things that I need to do and work into the picture of the garden and the seasons? It's way more dependent on timing. I love cover crops. They're more complex, and that's another whole like art form to get into. I did a previous 21 acres class on soil and soil health, and you can check that out for kind of some of my top recommendations. I really love this one, crimson clover. Oh my gosh. I planted 3 acres in crimson clover, and it was breathtakingly beautiful on an April morning to go out there and just see this carpet of velvety red flowers. I couldn't bring myself to mow it. It was so beautiful, which leads me to the other point about cover crops. They're dependent on timing. You have to mow them or figure out how to manage them, or they will just become the crop. They need to be mown, usually before flowering. They need to be killed in the right time so that you can plant some other things there. They can get out of hand. I've had places where I just grow rye because I planted rye as a cover crop in the fall, and it's an awesome cover crop. And then it grows 6 feet tall, and I'm standing there with my little hoe, like, this is just going to be rye. I can't even tackle these giant plants right now. So that's something to think about in the cover crop realm. Not all of them are as easy as others. I've heard people say that hairy vetch can just turn into this great big matted tangle of weeds, and be hard to deal with if you're a gardener with a hoe instead of somebody with a big tractor. The beauty of cover crops is you get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of materials. Those 3 acres of really bare land, I planted them with, 45 pounds of crimson clover seed, probably less, maybe more like 30. So I was just carrying 30 pounds of material out to the field, and I got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds of biomass for that input. So that's pretty cool. Makes more of a difference if you're working on multiple acres rather than in a garden, but then you only need a few handfuls of cover crop seed. Okay, we are moving right along. Boy, I was worried I wasn't going to be able to fill up the hour. And to answer the question about the fermentation barrel, I pretty much keep it cycling a lot during the warm months. It kind of just sits and burps occasionally throughout the winter because it's not warm enough to keep it going. And I'm sure not going to bring it inside. Hush, hush, duckies. Okay. On to compost. As I mentioned, in the seasonal realm of things, this time of year, everything is rotting. The leaves are rotting. The wood is rotting. Like, there's just fungus everywhere, mushrooms popping out of the forest. It must be time to make a compost pile. And I build up enough organic matter to build a giant, at least 3 feet tall heap every fall. I love doing this. It's like cooking for me. There are people, a lot of permaculture people are like, don't make compost, it's worthless, just chop and drop, and that's great too. That's like, hey, you can get takeout every day if you want, or you can just eat an energy bar and keep going. But if you really like to cook, then cook. So making compost for me is like cooking. I love cooking. I love making prime compost. So you don't have to go out and make compost. I'm just saying I love it. and I'm going to give you a few tips for if you want to like up your compost making game. It makes a big difference for us, especially for a high needs crop like brassicas, cabbages and stuff. So we also have enough person power on the farm to build this big pile. If it was just me and my little shoulders, I don't know that I would build so big a pile, but we have, garden day, we have help. This is what we do instead of going to the gym, is like turn a compost pile. We only turn it once. We build a big pile in the fall, we let it sit covered all winter, and then we flip it again next spring just to see what's going on. And then in a year from the time we built it, it's ready to go on plants. Here's the secret: add 5% clay and or plenty of soil, 5% plus soil as you build the pile. That has been a total game changer in terms of really keeping the nutrients, building humus. It's amazing. Clay is usually pretty available locally, just at a place where there's a roadside cut, where there's some place where you can get clay easily. I had a potter friend give me a bunch of, old, past its prime clay from a college pottery studio that was getting rid of it, like really good clay. And then I just make a slip with that, drizzle that on the compost pile. It's like cooking, like drizzle the clay in between the different layers of leaves and stuff. I also don't do sawdust. We use sawdust in our composting toilets. That's a great place for it. But no truly awesome veggie growing compost that I make has any significant quantity of sawdust in it. It's just too high in carbon for what we need to do. Okay, and there is my compost building team. You can see that they've been hard at work making, eating leaves all summer long, turning them into pre-fermented, pelletized compost starters. It's been awesome. So this is the goat pen, which is my compost yard. There I am standing there looking at different piles. We've got leaves, we've got chipped blackberry, we've got old bean stalks, we've got a bunch of horse manure and leaves underneath that piece of plastic. The reason these are in different piles is because I'm doing a compost making class where people will build the pile. Otherwise, we could just build it up as we go and kind of just build the pile all summer long. Lots of great ingredients. Variety is the spice of life. Pile it high, cover it to keep the rain out or keep the warmth and moisture in, and you're going to be good to go. If you want to pour a bucket of gray water on it or a bucket of urine on it over the winter, sometime that can kind of help give it a little boost and keep it moist. But this stuff is, this makes plants grow. I sift it for using it for potting mix, or just put chunks next to our cabbages for our high needs crops. I have a lot of crops where I'm like, you just got to grow out there, and just do your thing, you tomatoes, and I'll come pick tomatoes from you. I'm not going to pamper you, but I have other crops that I pamper. All right. If it all seems like too much work, check out Perennials, because eating food from Perennials is awesome. And I keep shifting my diet more and more towards Perennials. I think of, that wonderful man who was growing the nut trees and just had, he had left a legacy that can persist for 1,000+ years through planting nut trees. I'm like, I just don't see any reason not to plant them anywhere that there is space for them. So like hundreds of years of free food. We're harvesting chestnuts. Of course, so are a lot of the local squirrels are harvesting chestnuts off of the trees I planted 15 years ago. And probably in 200 or so years, those trees will really be in their prime. And who knows, like maybe the kids who were at the farm this morning, their great grandkids will be coming here and picking chestnuts. And it just feels like a really resilient neighborhood food source in terms of food that we can rely on even when we don't have a garden. So I'm a big advocate of planting perennial, whether it's nut trees or things like nettles, blueberries, sunchokes. We have a bunch of them down the driveway. Some years we'll harvest them, some years we don't. Fall's a great time to plant them. Give yourself and the future generations a gift by planting some perennials and enjoying them. Oh, and it doesn't even have to be nut trees. Here I am with some perennial wheat. So this is the pen where the goats live in the wintertime. The goats will come in, they'll munch the wheat down, but they won't kill it. And then next spring, when I move the goats back out of that pen, the wheat can grow back up and we just have a perennial source. We have living roots in the soil 24/7, 365. So just experiment with perennials. I don't really love hoeing and disturbing soil. I'll do it when I have to, but I really try to minimize it. And if there's a place I can plant perennials and just walk in and harvest and then walk away, that's awesome. Another, oh darn. Well, this is good. In terms of just a note on preparing your garden for the winter, snow, wind, extra rain. You know, we've had tarps get all saggy when the rain comes. We had to put boards in this hoop house to keep it from squashing our chickens when the snow came. But then that same hoop house, you can see there on the right, grew our peppers. We heaped up all the compost from the chickens, had a hot bed that warmed our peppers from below, and were able to grow a big crop of peppers. So do yourself a favor and keep your structures and your trellises in good shape and well braced for winter storms. And one more hint, looping us, well, I was going to say, check your timing and check your produce to keep your success. If you have a whole bunch of squash stored up that you made, you know, you had a great time growing, make sure none of them are turning into a moldy pile of oozing goo on the shelf. Ask me how I know this. Look through your potatoes and make sure that none of them are mushy. You know, we just had to factor in that time. It's like, wow, we've had all this gardening success. Great. Well, the gardening job is not actually done even when that produce is stored. Let's take a look through those parsnips every week. Let's take a look through the carrots. You know, let's make sure that none of the apples are getting too shriveled. Just factor in that time every week in terms of, you know, the cost of a resilient local food supply is attention and observation and care. So to eat really well, just know that and be willing to put in that time and love throughout the year with all the amazing food you grow. These are a few of the resources that I used, you know, looked through putting together this presentation. There are lots of great ones out there, but I hope this has given you a, you know, a little glimpse and a few ideas for your future success in the garden and beyond. So, yeah.
Oh, Alexia, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for, wasn't I right? Didn't I say that she's brilliant and talented and is an incredible resource of resilient gardening? It's such a treasure to have you work, do this work for yourself, your community, and thank you again for teaching us, because that is a gift that's going to also give, you know, for future generations. This is one giant, beautiful nut tree. And for folks who want to watch this again, we will be putting this up on YouTube in the coming weeks, most likely. Sometimes it takes a little while for it to load and render. But for, I had a couple questions.
Great.
And if you wanted to maybe share for folks that composting class you're going to be teaching, sounds like in person on your farm, or?
Yes, already, it's for a school group coming in, so it's all
Okay.
booked and buttoned up. Just wanted to explain why I wasn't just building the pile as I went, which is another option for folks who don't want to do a whole bunch of shoveling in one day.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, for folks who want to join the next course, we will be teaching again November 13th. Alexia will be sharing squash on the homestead.
Yeah.
Woo! A little example. What kind of squash is that?
This is a delicata squash. They sometimes, you know, kind of grow fused together. So this one just is a special one.
That's the coolest delicata I've ever seen. I love it.
And I can hang out for questions too.
That's exactly what I was going to say. For folks who wanted to stay an extra couple minutes and ask some questions, please do. For formalities of the YouTube, I'm going to end it here for my editor. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Okay.